Hey guys, welcome back to a new video. Today we are looking at the brand new NZXT N7 Z790 motherboard. We looked at the Z690 a little while back, and this is the latest and greatest version. We've also got the B650E, which we'll be covering in a separate video, likely after this video actually, by the time things come around. So stay tuned for that if you're wondering about the AMD version, but today we're going to look at the Team Blue variant. So Z790, there's one big change from this one to the previous Z690, which is the fact that NZXT are now using DDR5 on this board. You can support up to 128 gigabytes, up to, they say 5200 on the website. I think that's a little bit low. I think that's probably based off the DDR4 specs, but I would expect to go a lot higher, considering we're seeing over 6,000 mega transfers per second as a standard now. Let's have a look at the back. We have got some more specs if you want to look at any, just take a little pause and look in depth. But I will of course run you through these as we go. So let's take a little look inside the box. 6+1+2 phases, Dr. Moss power. And if you didn't know, these boards are actually manufactured by ASRock. So if you're familiar with ASRock boards, you'll recognize the layout the second that I open this. Very ASRock themed with the foam and then the bag. So we'll put that to the side for the moment. Take a look below at our accessories. So left hand side, just got some documentation. On the right hand side we have some M.2 screws, there's two there. We've got some Wi-Fi antennas, this has Wi-Fi 6E. There's another M.2, so 3 in total, and another standoff. And we have got some SATA 6E cables, one of which is right angled. So not very much accessory wise, but this keep the price of the board down, which I suppose is a good thing. So there we have the N7 Z790. So at a quick glance, it's really difficult to tell the differences between the last gen and this one, to be honest. There's very subtle differences. It's pretty much a case of spot the difference. I'll put the pictures for you to look at on the screen so you can see what I mean. But they are obviously keeping the very stealthy styling that we've seen before. Let's first have a look around our socket. We've got all the Dr. Moss power that I mentioned, so 16 plus 1 plus 2. See all the chokes and MOSFETs and things like that. Got some nice VRM cooling. This is a metal top plate. It does feel a little bit plasticky though. And then in the top left, we've got an 8+4. Generally see two 8 pins on Z790, so this is using a little bit less power than other boards. So we've got our first 4-pin fan headers. We've got a CPU fan and an AIO pump. Then we've got NZXT proprietary connectors for their RGB. There's 2 of those. Then 2 additional system fans on the far right. Continuing with the headers at the bottom, we've got our front panel, some power and reset, which is always good on a motherboard. 2 more of NZXT proprietary RGB connectors. Then we've got 3 more additional system fans. Typically for 4 pins, you'd see 2 at the bottom and then 1 on the left hand side, but because we've got all the armor on this board, there isn't one there. So NZXT have put an additional one down the bottom here, so you've still got your 7 like you would see on most motherboards. 2 USB 2 headers, also great for anything that uses control like Corsair Commanders or Razer hubs, NZXT hubs for that matter as well. Then we've got 2 USB 5V addressable headers, which is good to see. It's nice that NZXT aren't forcing you to use all their RGB. You can use the standard stuff as well. Then we have got front panel audio on the far left. So of course we've got our LG 1700 socket. Then our DIMM slots, as I mentioned, up to 128 gigabytes. Does support XMP 3.0 as well. We've got our 24-pin connector, of course, then our USB Type-C for internal connection. That's USB 3.2 Gen 2x2. Then our additional connectors are on the right angle, so we've got another USB 3 header. That's USB 3.2 Gen 1. Then we've got 4 SATA 6 gigabit connectors for any internal hard drives or SSDs. So much like other boards we looked at recently, they've got 4 instead of 6. So that shows you where the M.2 storage is going. So cheap, and such great sizes available that that's going to be the primary option over an external drive nowadays. So for our PCI slots, the top one is a magnetic one like we saw on the Z690. That just comes off like that. Then we have got 2 screws to remove for our first drive. So taking that off, we can see our first slot. This is a Gen 4 slot. There aren't any Gen 4 supported storage drives on this one. And then we've also got a thermal pad on the back of that. That supports up to 80mm drive. Below that is a PCI slot. That is a Gen 5. So when Gen 5 supported graphics cards are available, you can use that to the full potential. Further M.2 slots are under these magnetic covers. Very strong covers as well. We've got an additional M.2 slot here, which is up to a 110mm. We've got our Wi-Fi 6E just below that slot. Then we've got an additional M.2 in the bottom slot here. That's another 80mm drive at Gen 4. Some additional PCI lanes and then also some Gen 1. So if you're using capture cards, they can go in those slots. It's also worth noting that there's no thermal pads on slot 2 and 3. It's only on the primary drive that has one. So let's put this armor back together. As a quick additional note, you can take all of this off should you wish to go for a really bare board. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but that is an option if you fancy it. Last but not least, let's move on to the rear I/O, and we have a few different bits and bobs. So we've got a clear CMOS button on the very top, an HDMI out, so great if you've got a K-series processor for any diagnostics, our Wi-Fi 6E antennas, the first 2 USB ports are USB Gen 2, the next 3 light blue ones are USB 3.2 Gen 1, and then the darker blue are USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports. We've also got our 2.5 gig LAN, and then there's also a Type-C, which is USB 3.2 Gen 2x2, so 20 gigabits per second. Some simple I/O, and then we've also got an SP-Diff out as well. So let's compare with the Z690, the different changes that they've implemented in this version. So the top is pretty much identical. Obviously I did mention the DIMM slots are different, so DDR4, DDR5. That's one thing you can actually notice by the fact that the notch is slightly higher in the new version. Serial number is in a slightly different position, but apart from that, it looks really similar. If we go a little bit further down, we have got some differences down here. So we've got a 5V addressable on the Z690, and there's a standard 12V. But on the Z790, we've got 2 addressable 5V, which I think was a common complaint on the Z690. You only had 1 addressable RGB header, so it is nice that there's an extra one on the new version. Apart from that, things are fairly similar. We have got an additional 2 NZXT RGB headers on the new version as well. You can see they're missing on the older version. But on the actual face of the board, that seems to be pretty much it. On the rear I/O, there's literally one difference, which is the lack of a BIOS flash. Now, I would have liked to have seen that on the new version, to be honest, especially at the price point. It does remove a few steps with having that button. So for example, you don't need to have a display output, don't need a monitor. You can literally plug in your USB and then hold down the button and it will update. You just need power. So that is a little bit of a shame, but of course you can still flash it by going into the BIOS. So the N7 Z790 will be available for £339 on the NZXT website. Probably a little bit cheaper by the time it comes to online retailers, but it puts it between the Asus TUF and the MSI Tomahawk range. So do let me know what you think about this down in the comments box below. Looking forward to putting this in a build, so stay tuned and get subscribed so you don't miss that. Ding the bell as well. We have got the other content, of course, for the AMD version that will be probably after this one. So if you're interested in the Team Red version, then stay tuned for that. So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you to NZXT for sending these out for me to look at, and I'll see you all in the next one.